So we finished the first 7 chapters, which describe the avodah, the service that the high priest did on Yom Kippur. So now the last chapter is going to be the other mitzvot of Yom Kippur, mainly the inuyim, the things that we do to afflict ourselves by not eating and drinking, etc. And we'll end off with on a more spiritual, philosophical note. But among the things that we're going to examine, we're going to come across the concept of pikuach nefesh. And the Mishnah here, a little later on, we may get there today, probably not. Wait a second. Probably not. But the Mishnah Zayin, is where we get the term pikuach nefesh from. So we'll see that when we get there. Let's begin here. So Mishnah Aleph. Yom Kippur Sur ba'achila u'b'shtiya u'b'rechitzah u'b'sicha u'b'nilat adal u'b'tashmish hamita. So Yom Kippur is forbidden with eating, drinking, and washing, and anointing, and oh, here's Paul. So I was completely wrong about that. All right, hold on a second. Wow. Connecting. Shalom, Paul.
שלום, מה שלומכם? אני בחוץ, אני בהליכה, אז...
איפה אתה? אתה פה בארץ?
לא, אני בארץ, זה בסדר.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
ברוכים הבאים.
אני אסגור את הוידאו, כי ההליכה זה לא עוזר לי כל כך, אני לא יודע איך עושים את זה.
אז תשאיר את זה ככה, זה לא משנה. תשאיר את זה ככה. אני לא מסתכל כל כך על הפרצופים שלכם, רק בזמן שאנחנו...
לא, כן, אבל כשאני הולך והטלפון בכיס, אז זה לא עוזר הדבר הזה.
זה לא מפריע, אוקיי. אוקיי.
אני מקשיב.
אוקיי, בסדר. And here's Michael Werner. Hello. So, okay. So this is what happens. I just started, Paul came, and then Michael came. So since I just started, you didn't miss much. We're at the beginning of the chapter. So Yom Kippurim is forbidden in eating and drinking and washing and anointing and in putting on a sandal, putting on a shoe, with tashmish hamita, literally use of the bed, which is a what's the
marital relations
word for? Yeah, that's not the word I'm looking for. What do you call it? I can't think of word. Euphemism. It's a euphemism for marital relations. V'hamelech v'hakala yirchatzu et b'neihem, and the king and the bride will wash their faces. V'chaya tinol et sandal, and the woman who just gave birth will put on a shoe. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Rezu says that. The Chachamim osrim. Chachamim forbidden. Okay, so let's take down this Mishnah a little bit. So first of all, So the beginning is this kind of flat statement that lists the things that one is forbidden to do on Yom Kippur. So how many things are there?
Six.
Okay, so we count six. We count six. But we'll have to see if that's exactly right, and for what purpose does it matter how many there are or there aren't. We'll discuss that. The moment we see six. Now, of the six, though, two of them seem to be related, and which ones are those?
Eating and drinking.
Eating and drinking. So we will ask this question, are they in fact separate things, or is eating and drinking one thing? Right, because in both cases you're consuming food sort either by eating it or drinking it. So does that count as one thing or another thing? Does anybody know what difference it makes? What difference does it make if it's one thing or two things?
Well, one difference, I mean, the shiurim are different for eating and drinking. One. Okay,
right, that's a difference between them. A difference between them is, as we'll see in Mishnah, the shiurim, how much you eat and how much you drink, are not measured in the same way. By the same token, what difference would it make if they are separate isurim or if they're considered to be the same isur?
It would depend. It would, if they were separate, it may require a separate korban for each one.
Right. So if you ate or drank right, in an unconscious fashion, if you ate and drank, if they are separate isurim, then you'd have to bring a korban chatat for each of them. If they're the same isur, then you would only bring one korban chatat. So that's a practical difference, which we'll have to discuss. So then that's the first statement. The second statement are these other people. So we have the king and the kala, the bride. They wash their faces. The chaya tinot sandal, the woman who just gave birth, put on her shoe. So what are these being brought for here?
They're exceptions to the general population.
So right, there are exceptions to this rule that we just laid out. We laid out this rule that Yom Kippur is asur in all of these things, but we have three exceptions. That a king has to wash his, or will wash his face. The kala will wash her face, and the chaya will put on her shoe. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. So what part of these statements do we attribute to Eliezer? Or to put it differently, until now, we haven't attributed a name to anything that we've said. All right, so now we said Yoma Kippurim Asur, etc., and then Hamelch v'Kala, etc., v'Hachaya, etc. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. So which part of these statements did Rabbi Eliezer say?
Presumably the exception.
Presumably the exceptions.
It's in the plural.
Well, it's interesting that you say, because if he said but this is a general rule, right? We always do this when we have this question. We're going to assume that he said the stitch immediately before. Presumably, that for sure Rabbi Eliezer said.
It makes
And-
it makes sense that, I mean, if whatever he did not say was presumably said by the Hachamim, but then there'd be no point to the final state by the Hachamim.
Why not?
Well, I mean, why would they give an exception and then immediately overturn it?
Well, wait, I'm not sure what you're saying because I could read the Mishnah like this. Now I did the punctuation here, right? So I put a period after the Tashmish Hamita because I see the end of the sentence. But for a moment that the punctuation is not technically part of the Mishnah. And when it says continuation from whoever's the Tanakama. And then v'hachayat to sandal could either continue from the top, or it's going to go to the Rebbe. Now we just said logically we'd have to say that at least it says at least this much, but maybe not more than this. So I understand it as follows, that up until this point, everybody agrees. Then Rabbi Eliezer adds their exception, and when it says v'chachamim osrim, they're oser his exception, but they agree with the earlier exceptions. Or he did the other way, which I think Michael Werner is suggesting, which all of these are divrei Rabbi Eliezer, and Chachamim Osrin are on all of the exceptions. So we'll see that actually it is that's the reading that the Gemara accepts, and that's also from the Bartanura. We'll lean in that direction because sorry, somebody's going out here. The Chachamim Osrim, right, they're Oser, since they don't make any specification. So presumably they're Oser every. Okay, first Mishnah. Before we do the Bartanura, I think we're going to go ahead and read the next couple of Mishnayot. As I mentioned, I think in some previous shiurim, my intent in going through this chapter is to go through the chapter of Mishnah with the Bartanura, and then to go back and examine very specific sugyot in Gemara. So we're going to go through this a little bit faster than usual. Ha'ochel kichotevet hagasa. Someone who eats as much as a fat date. Kamoa uchegarinata. Like it and like its seed. And someone who drinks their cheekful is chayav. All foods combine to make it the size of a kotevet. All drinks, all fluids are going to combine to make his cheekful. One who eats and drinks, those do not combine. Okay, so let's look at this a little more closely. one who eats the size like, in other words, really like a fat date, like it and like its seed. What do we call this seed for a date?
Pit, no?
Yeah, okay. I wasn't sure. Yeah, I think you're
Not
right.
sure either.
No, but my inclination is to pit, and I was counting on you to tell me. So let's go with pit. Date pit. Yeah, sounds right. Okay, so what does that mean? Kamo b'chidarinatan, like it and like its pit.
The two together form a unit of volume.
Very good. Well done. So in other words, we don't eat the pit. So why would I think then that the pit isn't part of this? Because if I say kichotevet hagasa, I would think that it's going to be the part that I eat, because here I'm measuring amounts of food. But we're using the size of the kotevet hagasa as a measure, as a volumetric measure, like Michael just said. So the Mishnah has to point out that the volume that we're talking about, for which you'll be chayav if you eat on Yom Kippur, is the size of the kotevet along with its gari. And so, therefore, if somebody actually eats a kotevet gasa, they wouldn't be chayav, right? Because they don't eat the pit. So kotevet hagasa by itself is not a shiur; it's the shiur plus the pit. Somebody who eats their cheeks full. So we'll see. That's right. That's the amount of liquid that you can stuff into one. If you push all of it, if you drink something and push it all one side of your mouth, that's called malol mouth. So so what's interesting about each of these? So the shiur, we haven't really studied shiurim before. In fact, sorry, hold on one second. I started to I see now. I was literally in the middle of preparing something earlier, and I was telling Michael Schwartz I had a lot of interruptions today. Just 1 second, if I can find this right away, I'll show you. So I won't go into this now, but I think we go back over this in greater detail. We will go into some discussion about shiurim. So, but let's just take a moment to ponder this. And I know that we're all used to hearing different shiurim, kizayit, kibetza, etc. So here we have this shiur. It's a shiur for Yom Kippur that normally achila for other purposes is defined as eating as much as a kazayit, or for some purposes kibetza. On Yom Kippur, it's defined as being kotevet hagasa. So, of course, we want to know how big is that. Let's say I have a bunch of tovot, right? I have a bunch of these fat dates. Now, they're not all precisely the same size. In fact, probably notes are exactly alike. So how do we measure? Part of the issue here is that, is this is this a relative measure? Is it based on the kind, whatever I think the average Kotevet Hagasai is, or is it Dafka a large Kotevet because it's Kotevet Hagasai? We're in our day and age, we're used to these very precise measurements, right? But here in the Mishnah, if I have only the Mishnah, then it's a little less clear. And then when I read Ashotem Melod Lugmav, one who drinks their cheekful, then all the more so, right? Because from one person to the next full is going to be a different size. So let's for a moment the cheekful. Why might the Mishnah use a cheekful as a shiur for Yom Kippur?
It is a readily available measure.
First of all, it's a readily available measure. You can measure that, right? As long as you have cheeks, you can measure it. Let's take it one step further.
If you don't have cheeks, then the Shia is not going to do you any good anyway.
Presumably not. Let's take it one step further. What are we concerned about here? We're concerned that somebody eats or drink, right, a certain amount on Yom Kippur. Michael Schwartz, you want to say something?
Yes, because the prohibition is against drinking, so that's the minimum amount you need to be considered like a gulp, like a drink.
Right, and let me just stretch it out a little bit more. So it could be that then Melod Lugmav is dafka each person according to the size mouth. In other words, it doesn't matter if my cheekful is bigger or smaller than yours. What's important is that when a person drinks, we could argue that the minimum amount that they would consider to be drinking, or certainly that the Chachamim are saying, the minimum amount that's considered to be actually drinking is any given person's cheekful. So that could be absolutely a relative amount and not a specific amount, right? So if you're a large person, if you drink a cheekful of a very small person, you might not consider that to be drinking, or Chachamim might not consider it to be drinking. So yeah, anyway, we'll look at this a little more closely today with the Bartanura, but again, you have to come back to the whole question of what are shiurim and what are they there for, right? So, well, we could make a short statement now. Why do we have shiurim at all? What if the Torah says don't eat and don't drink on Yom Kippur? Why do I need to measure that?
One could say that if you go a certain amount, it's not really eating.
Apparently not, right? Apparently not. The idea is that, well, let's switch.
I mean, I can actually maybe rephrase that. The wording would maybe suggest that what is forbidden is not food, but the act of eating. Similarly with drinking. And so
okay.
I'm not going to go. Actually, I'm going. Never mind. I'm going out on a limb, and it's a ridiculous one. So I'm going to draw.
Okay. No, but here's the thing: the Isur is on eating and drinking, right? So, and then as we go through, we're going to see to what extent that goes. Like, what if I eat or drink something that's not something that is really fit to eat or drink? That and we'll get to that. That's another issue. what I wanted to say is this: when we talk about shiurim for eating, let's say in order to eating enough to say birkat, that's based on the pasuk that says v'achalta v'savato ve'erach. You shall eat and you shall be sated, and then you will bless. So the Torah demands that before making a blessing on what you've eaten, then the savata, you have to have sviyah, you have to enough to be sated. So Chachamim say that means you have to eat at least a beitza. You have to eat at least the size of an egg's worth of food. It's midioraita. But midurabanan, they say if you eat even a kazayit, you should still make a bracha. So there, but the point is that there we actually have a Torah that gives us this prerequisite that before you bench, you have to have kedei sviyah. You have to have enough to be sated. Here, it's not obvious. I might say, once the Torah forbids me from eating or drinking, maybe there is no shiur. Anything that I put in my mouth and swallow, that maybe that's enough for me to be over, right? It's violated the Torah prohibition. Nonetheless, so again, this is a question we're going to have to come back to. There's another thing I want to point out. There's an important difference in language from the first Mishnah to the second Mishnah. First Mishnah says Yoma Kippurim Asur, B'achila B'shtiya, etc. It's asur in all of these things. And here it says Ha'ochel or Shoteh Chayav. What's the difference between saying asur and saying chayav?
Chayav means one is liable to a punishment.
Okay.
And one is obligated to bring a korban.
Okay, right. Well, you'll be obligated to bring a korban if you did a b'shogeg, and you'll be chayav karet if you did a b'mezid, and so forth. But so we see already from the second Mishnah that eating, drinking is a chiyuv, right? If you eat or drink on Yom Kippur, you're chayav. Why doesn't it say in the first Mishnah, ha'ochel or shoteh or rochet, etc., Yom Kippurim chayav? It says that it's asur in these things, but we know now that in fact you're chayav. So why does the first Mishnah use this language of asur? Okay, so I'm pointing it out as a question. We don't know, but Michael Schwartz, you want to say something?
Only because it was in the first Mishnah, it's talking about a general rule. And so it's laying out the basic foundation, whatever you want to call it, of the rule. And now in the second Mishnah, when it starts talking about shiurim, there's a slightly different take, maybe.
Okay, so that's one possibility. In other words, we could look at it that the first line in the first Mishnah is kind of a general introduction. It's not telling me yet that the Torah is mechayev oti, that if I'm over, right, if I transgress and I do any of these things on Yom Kippur, that the Torah is going to obligate me some kind of punishment. It's just telling me generally these are asur, and then we'll break them down, and then we'll see that, for what one is to be chayav. That's a possibility. I think this has come up in some previous shiurim where you may have learned this yourself. For example, in Masechet Shabbat, and this is true in any other Masechtot, when the when the Mishnah discusses some kind of act that one shouldn't do on Shabbat, then it'll either say that if you do this on Shabbat, you're chayav or tur, right? And there also it means that if you did it b'shogeg, that you'll be chayav, and if you did it or katur, meaning if you, however you did it, you're exempt from any kind of punishment. And then the Gemara though explains that it says patur means patur aval asur. That even places where the Mishnah says that you're exempt from punishment, it's still asur. And the Yisur generally is going to be an Yisur d'Rabbanan. So there's an association with the word Asur and the idea that something is d'Rabbanan. It's a technical term. So even though it literally means it's forbidden, and you could say it's forbidden from the Torah, it could be forbidden from the Rabbanan, but often the term Asur is associated with Dinim d'Rabbanan. And chayav, of course, is nearly always going to be referring to something that's asur midioraita. So this is to sharpen the question a little bit. And it says Yoma Kippurim asur ba'achila b'shtiya. I might think that means that it's asur midirabanan. When I come to Mishnah Bet, I know that at least achila b'shtiya is dioraita, because it says chayav. But it still begs the question, so why did it say asur in the first Mishnah? So again, we'll come back to that. Let's look at the second part of the Mishnah. Kol ha'ochalin mitztarfin l'chekotebet. All foods combine to the size of a kotebet, size of a day. What does that mean? All foods combine to the size of a kotebet.
So if your mouthful, or it includes several different kinds of food, they all combine into the same measure. So it's not a kotevet. It's not a kotevet of this food, another kotevet this food, and the kotevet this food, but rather all the foods combined make one kotevet.
Excellent, very good. So if I have a little bit of pimento and a little bit of meat and a little bit of bean or whatever it is, even though each one of those types of foods, I'm not eating a shiur, I'm not eating a kotevet of each one of them. But if I eat all together a kotevet, then I'm chayav. Right? All drinks combine to make a cheekful in the same way. In other words, when you say malol lugmav, you might think that means that I actually have to have enough in my mouth at a given moment, that I could push it all to one side and fill up my cheek and then to swallow it. But it's not so. I could have a sip of a bunch of different things. And if it all totaled a malol lugmav, then I would be chayav. One who eats and drinks, they do not combine. So what does that mean?
So the two measures are separate. So it's like the food does not count towards the measure of the drink, and vice versa.
Right. So if I ate half a kotevet and I drank half of my cheekful, those two measures don't combine to make either a cheek or a kotevet. If I'm just under a shiur of food, I drink just under a shiur of liquid, they still combine to make, even though I as it were, like together, if you were put the food in your cheek, or if you would add the volume of the liquid to the shiur, the kotev, but still they don't combine. They don't combine. So from here we see that achila and shtiyah are separate, at least as far as their shiurim go. As far as their shiurim go, they're separate. You deal with them separately. So let's go on to the next Mishnah. Achal v'shata be'elem achat. If one ate and drank in one unconscious act, in one unconscious state, eno chayav ela chatat achat. He's only chayav one chatat. Achal v'asam melacha chayav shtei chataot. But if he ate and did melacha, then he would be obligated two separate korbanot chatat. So, what's a helem? Find it as an unconscious state. What does that mean?
It's related to like missing. So he's doing both things like at one time in one instance, both drinking and eating in one
one fell swoop.
Yeah, in one moment of not paying attention.
Okay, so let's define this a little bit better. So this is the idea of shogeg. The idea of shogeg is that you have helem. And like you said, it's from the word from the root of ayin lam mem, which would mean something that's missing or something that's hidden. Helem, as a state of mind, means that you're not aware. When I say unconscious, it's not necessarily good, because you might think that the person is knocked out. You're unaware of something that is an essential part of what would make one chayav for doing whatever it is they're doing. So regarding Yom Kippur, so you're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. If you eat on Yom Kippur knowingly, meaning, what is knowingly? It means that you know that it's Yom Kippur, and you know that you're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. And if you also know that you're chayav, that you will be obligated some kind of punishment, then when you do those
and also
things,
presumably also you know that you're eating.
and that, yeah, very good.
If a fly goes into your mouth and you swallow it without thinking, then you don't necessarily know that you're eating as you're doing it.
Yeah, possibly, right. In other words,
that's not a nice example, but yes.
No, that it's okay. The Gemara has even more extreme examples. So, but this is the idea. So here's the thing. On Yom Kippur, just a second. All right, we'll leave it at this for now. We'll look at the psukim maybe next time. If you eat on Yom Kippur, b'meizid, purposely, then you're chayav karev. It's one of the things you're chayav karev for. If you do it, edim v'hatra'ah, then hold on a second. Um, okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little distracted. I'll just stick to what we have. If we're talking about shogeg, right? So if you're shogeg when you eat on Yom Kippur, then when it will become whatever is unconscious is whatever you're unconscious about becomes revealed to you, then you'll be obligated to bring the korban chatat. So, right, either you're going to be unconscious of the fact that it's Yom Kippur, or be unconscious of the fact that you're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. If you're completely unconscious of the fact that you're not eating, then that might be a different category, right? If somebody, if a fly jumps into your mouth and you swallow it willy-nilly, then you're on. I would say that you're anus, right? Even if you're aware of it going down, if it gets far enough down in your throat, you'll have no choice except to swallow it, because you have a bodily mechanism. When something goes down a certain part of your throat, it's going to be swallowed. So there you might be that is, it was done against your will. So generally speaking about shogeg, you're going to be unconscious of either the fact that it's Yom Kippur, or that you're not allowed, that you don't know that you're not allowed to eat. You know that it's Yom Kippur, but you don't know that you're not allowed to eat on Yom. So that the helem is the period of time when you're not aware of one of those things. You're not aware that it's Yom Kippur. Could be you get up in the morning on Yom Kippur and you're used to having like a glass of water, get out of bed, and drinking before you realize that today is Yom Kippur. Or there are any number of ways that it could happen that you don't remember it's Yom Kippur. Or you don't realize you're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. Now we all do realize you're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur, but what if you were brought up in such a way that nobody told you? That'll tell you, like you can see on a calendar, it's Yom Kippur, but nobody told you that you're Jewish, and nobody told you that Jews aren't allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. That would also be a kind of hell. So, so if you eat and drink one unconscious or one unaware act, or one period, not necessarily once, but one period of time when you're behelem, when something is hidden from you, either that it's Yom Kippur or that you're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur, then eino chayav el chatat echad. Then you're chayav one korban chatat. So what does that tell you then? What does that tell you, that we might not have understood from the previous mission?
It would suggest that achila and shtia are considered different components of the same act for the purpose of the count.
For the purpose of, what did you say?
Counting the number of asurim.
The number of isurim.
Right, to the east.
No, I just want to make my understanding you.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be pedantic. I could do that too, but I just want to make sure I understand it. So in the previous, let's say this, in the previous mission, the last Mishnah ended off by telling us ha'ochel b'shoteh ein mitztarfim. If you eat and drink, they don't combine. And here it says if you eat and drink behelem echad, then eno chayav el chatat echad. But why? They're considered to be the same isur. So now we have to understand, we have to refine this a little bit. So when we said ochel v'shoteh, oh, here's Paul. Oh. Well,
Paul and his doppelganger.
Right. We have Paul and a double Paul. So if somebody eats and drinks, on the one hand, ein mitztarfin. So if you ate less than a shiur and drank less than a shiur, even though you did both of those things, they're not mitztarfin. For what purpose are they not mitztarfin? For what purpose don't they combine?
For a shiur, for the shiur, the minimum shiur.
They don't combine to make a single shiur for which you'll be chayav. But if you ate and drank behelem echad, eino chayav ela chatat echad, you're only chayav one chatat. And it says, but it means that you will be chayav a chatat. So how much did you eat and to be chayav a chatat?
Each one would be more than the minimum shiur.
So each one would be more than a minimum shiur, because if I ate a shiur and I ate less, drank less than a shiur, we know that the amount that I drank isn't part of my chesed, right? It's not mitztaref to however much I ate. So if I ate a kikotevet, but I drank less than the lo lugmav, be chayav a chatat, and the fact that I drank a shiur, I might consider those to be two completely separate acts, such that I should be chayav two chataot. So the chidush of our Mishnah, of Mishnah Gimel, is if you ate, like Michael Schwartz said, if you ate at least the minimum shiur and you drank the minimum shiur, and you might think that you'll be chayav two korbanot chatat, but since you did them behelem achat, since you did them in one unconscious act or one unconscious time, then you're only chayav one chatat. So it means that technically achilav v'shtiyah is one isur Torah, but it subdivides into the two categories of achilav v'shtiyah when it comes to figuring out how much you have to eat or drink in order to be chayav. So if you ate a whole kikotevet and you drank a whole malo lugma behelem achat, or even more than that, right? But at least that much, you still only be chayav one chatat. However, achal v'asa malacha chayav shtei chatat. If you ate and you did malacha, in what state? What does it mean, achal v'asa malacha? That you ate and you did malacha. What's missing from the sentence that we get from the previous sentence?
Helem.
Helem achat, right? It's building on the previous sentence. It's as if it's saying achal v'asa malacha v'helem achat. So there, what would the helem be? Well, I mean, again, it could be either way, but basically there are two things that one might not be aware of, either that it's Yom Kippur or that these things are asur, and you know it's Yom Kippur, but you don't know that these things are asur on Yom Kippur, right? But either way, so if he ate and he did malacha behelem achat on Yom Kippur, then he's chayav tu chatot. So what do we understand? Malacha is a separate category when it comes to the chiyuv. So up until this point, we haven't mentioned malacha. When we make the list in the beginning of the Mishnah, it gives us these 6 things. These are 6 things that are asur on Yom Kippur. It doesn't mention malacha. It's only being introduced now. So what are the 6 things in the first Mishnah? What do they have in common? We understand how achila and shtiyah, what those have in common. What about the rest of them? Why are these all in the same list and they don't include malacha?
All the first 6 things are things that are specific to Yom Kippur, and malacha is for all Hagim.
That's true. That's true. But can we say something tighter? What these things in particular have in relationship with one another that malacha does not?
They maybe that those 6 things, if they're done, then mezid.
Think about what they are. What are these things? What do they have in common?
They involve the body.
They're all things, they're all bodily pleasures. They're all things that benefit your body. Malacha is a whole separate category. So, achila, shtiyah, rechitza, sicha, nilata, sandal, tashmish, mita, these are all things that are for bodily pleasure or to benefit your body in some way or to protect you from harm in the case of nilata, sandal, or because it's more comfortable. So we understand that these should be one category, right? So these are the category of iyim, right? The Gemara calls inuyim because we learned from the pasuk that says initem et nafshotechem, that you have to afflict your body on Yom Kippur. So these are inuyim. Malacha is a second category. So by rights, then we understand that if you ate and did malacha, those are even if the halem was that you realized it was Yom Kippur, but you're doing 2 completely separate things. Now that we've made this relationship between the inuyim, then we would want to know, what if somebody eats and washes? Is that the same isur? Is that the same isur for the inyan chatat? Or, since I used this word asur in the beginning of the Mishnah, maybe all of these things are not asur midioraita. Maybe like we said, asur can mean midirabanan, and say maybe rechitza, sicha, nilata, sandal, tashmisha, mita are not really asur except midirabanan, and achila and shtiyah are included just as a mnemonic, just because it's easier to remember. Because then right away in Mishnah Bet, I'm going to find out that achila and shtiyah are different because those are actually asur d'oraita. For those who have a few, I'm putting these out as possible. I'm not telling you this is pshat. These are things that we have to consider because now we've come to Mishnah Gimel. We have 6 isurim that are mentioned in the first Mishnah. In the second Mishnah, we introduced the idea that for achila and shtiyah, chiyuv, which means that it's the chiyuv for sure. And now in Mishnah Gimel, I've also introduced another chiyuv d'oraita, which is malacha. So I need to be able to distinguish and make sure I understand what the implications of each of these things are. Let's finish off Mishnah. Achal achalin sheinan ru'uyin la'achila. If someone ate things that are not proper to eat, or not something that we'll talk about that in a second. V'shata mashkin she'enan ru'uyin l'shtiyah. If someone drank drinks that are not proper to drink or not fit, that's the word I'm looking for. They're not fit to drink. V'shata tzir o muyas. And they drank tzir, it's like brine and murias. These are things that like brine or a jelly kind of thing that people use to preserve other foods. Patur. Then you're patur. So what does it mean? What does it mean that it's food that's not fit to drink? Food that's not fit to drink, that's not fit to drink.
I mean, I can think of defining this in two ways. One, these are things that we would not think of as human foods, or
Okay.
it would be sort of the category that we use for Pesach, which is ein roi, or for chametz on Pesach, which if it's lo roi achilat kelev, then we're patur. And so it could be one of the
Michael,
other.
you somehow you dropped out. Can you say the last thing, the second possibility again? I didn't
So
hear
the
it.
second possibility would be the criterion that we use for patirat chametz on Yom Kippur, which is if it's ein roi achilat kelev.
Well, but that's ein ra'ui kelev. What does that mean? That's ein ra'ui lechev. What does that mean?
So, I mean, presumably the second includes the first. There are things that would be in the second that would, and there are things that be in the first that would not necessarily be in the second.
Well, wait, no, I'm just asking you this question. What does it mean? What does ein ra'ui achilat kelev mean? What does that mean?
Even a dog would not eat it. Like even sort of like your usual standard dog would not eat it.
Okay, so it's not fit for, and we trust the dog to, based on his senses, to know what he will or will not eat. So ein ra'ui lo means that it's right. It's not fit for a dog. So in the same sense, here, ochlin she'enan ru'uyin la'achila, that would be food for a human. That's all it means. It's not fit for a human. In other words, we're not going to say if it wasn't fit for a dog, because that's not relevant here. It's relevant for reasons we don't have to get into. But here, we're only talking about humans eating. It's not asur. The Torah doesn't say your animals have to observe Yom Kippur, except we'll understand not linyan inuyim. The inuyim are for people and not for animals. So the point is, it's the first thing you said. In other words, it's people don't eat. Achal achalin she'enan ru'uyin la'achila. So that could mean anything that isn't food. So like these that eat glass, right? It's or start to eat paper, or if you start to eat things that are not food at all, even if you can consume them, even if you can somehow chew them up and swallow them, but they're not considered to be food. And since they're not considered to be food, then you'll be exempt from any chiyuv for eating them. But again, well, this is the first time we see it here, but this is an example. It says patur, but it could be patur v'asur. It's still for, you're not allowed to start to eat things that are not ra'ui la'achila, but there will be no punishment from the Torah. Same thing. Shata mashkin v'she'inan ru'uyin l'shtiyah. So if you drink bleach, or if you drink gasoline, or if you drink, any kind of liquid that people drink, those are not consumables. And then the last thing it says, shatat muryas. So tzir, like I say, is brine. Muryas is a kind of like, I think of it more as a jelly kind of thing. It's like the brine that you preserve fish in. So if you drink those, you're patur. So what does tzir and muryas add? Why do I need those? I just said shata mashkin she'einam ru'uyin l'shtiyah.
Last two things are things that we would maybe consume a little bit of in together with other foods. So like we're eating pickles, then we would eat some brine. We'd have some brine with it. And if we're eating fish that's been preserved in that particular way, we would have a little bit of, we'd end up consuming a little bit of morias.
Right, very good. When I say mashkin she'enan ru'uyin l'shtiyah, so then I could say, I understand that to mean things that people would never, like gasoline or like mashaloyah, right? Things that people don't drink, even though liquids. But I add in sir and muryas is in that category, that even though I do actually consume them, I do end up drinking them or consuming them as part of a meal, right? Because if I eat something that was pickled or I eat something that were preserved, I am going to eat some of that. So I know that it's edible. I can understand that the first two clauses are talking about things that are not edible. But this is edible. But nonetheless, you're patur. So why are you patur for tzir and muryas?
You normally don't eat them by themselves. As Michael said, they're eaten with something else.
Them by yourselves. So, right, whether we consider that to be eating or drinking. And what's the point? In order to be chayav, so, right, in order to be chayav on Yom Kippur, it's telling us something about this isur of achila and shtiyah. If you're eating and drinking on Yom Kippur, what we're finding out is it's not under all circumstances of eating and drinking will you be chayav. You're only going to be chayav for eating and drinking things that people normally eat, drink as food or drink unto themselves. So people wouldn't normally drink brine or not below, right? So let's say if you're eating a pickle, so you'll have, some action of the shiur is going to be the brine, but you wouldn't take and just drink things straight. You're not going to drink a shiur of brine. So that's the chidush. Even though these things are edible, but since I don't normally eat them, say unto themselves, then you're patur. I think at this point, let's head back and let's look at the Bartanura. As Yoma Kippurim Asur B'Achila B'Shtiyah B'Rechitza, right? But Bartanura says Yoma Kippurim Asur B'Achila B'Shtiyah Af Al Gav De B'Achila U'Shtiyah Anush Karetz Mishum Debaya Limitne Shari Nuyin Delet B'Hu Karet Tana Asur. So even though eating and drinking, if someone eats or drinks on Yom Kippur.
I'm sorry, could you scroll the screen back to where you're reading from?
It's appearing on my screen that I'm reading from the place. Hold on, let me see. I don't know why
It's like it's so on my screen is on.
No, I see what you're saying. Can you see it now?
So see it now.
You just okay. Yeah, it's funny because it appeared to me and not to you, but I see what it. Okay, so Yom Kippurim asur b'achila v'shtia afal gav d'bachia anush karet. So even though for achila and shtia one gets a punishment of karet. In other words, if you eat or drink on Yom Kippur, you have fallen into this category where if you did that b'meizid, then you would get the punishment of karet. Mishum debay lemitnei shari nuyin delet karet tana asur. Because we have to learn these other afflictions that do not have with karet, they're not karet. So the Tana says asur. So this was one of the ways we thought to understand the Mishnah, that asur is a term that's used to refer to things that are asur midrabanan, or or for which there is no chiyuv midioraita. Either it's asur midirabanan, or possibly asur dioraita, but it's asur in such a way that it doesn't carry a punishment. So these things are all lumped together in a single list, even though of the list, one is only chayav karet for eating and drinking. And the rest of them are not a chiyuv karet. So the question is, what's the status then of the rest of the things? We understand asur, but are they asur dioraita or are they asur d'rabanan? So Bartanur goes on to say, Hani chamisha inuyin keneged chamisha inuyin aktuvim b'Torah. So these 5 afflictions are in correspondence to the 5 afflictions that are written in the Torah. And then he quotes from these psukim, the Shabbat Shabbaton, de'emor el kohanim, or it uses the term Shabbat Shabbaton in Parshat Emor el kohanim. The Shabbat Shabbaton de'achrei mot, when it says Shabbat Shabbaton in Parshat Achrei Mot, V'asor lechodesh techumash hapkudim, when it talks about the 10th of the month in Bamidbar, in Parshat Pinchas, V'asor lechodesh de'amor al kohanim, and also talks about the 10th in the month in Parshat Emor, V'ayta zot lachem lechukat olam d'achrei mot. And also, this is a chukat olam to you in Achrei Mot. The chulhu ktiv ta'anu v'init. All right, let's look at these psukim. I have them down here. Sheshet yamim te'aseh melacha u'v'yam hashvi Shabbat Shabbaton nikra kodesh. Kol melacha lo ta'asu Shabbat hu Hashem b'chol moshvotechem. Oh, that got weird. Okay, I'll have to fix it. Shabbat Shabbaton hi lechem v'initem et nafshotechem. Hold on 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. Shabbat Shabbaton hi lachem v'initem et nafshotechem chukat olam. Uve'asor lechodesh hashvi hazeh mikra kodesh yeh lachem v'initem et nafshotechem kol melacha ta'asu. Ach be'asor lechodesh hashvi hazeh Yom Kippurim hu mikra kodesh yeh lachem v'initem nafshotechem v'kraftem mishem. והייתה זאת לכם לחוקת עולם, לכפר בני ישראל מכוח חטאותם אחת בשנה, Vayas kasher tzivah Hashem et Moshe. So technically, they don't all use the term inui in these psukim. But we get it. Hold on a second. Okay. Next time, because it's getting late. Next time we're going to examine the psukim a little bit more closely, or maybe not next time. When we do some of the sugyot mala, I want to look at these a little more closely. But the idea is, so what does the Bar Tanura say? Hani chamisha inuyin keneged chamisha inuyin aktuvim b'Torah. So these are 5 references to inuyim, and so the 5 inuyim that we list in the Mishnah are in correspondence to 5 places that the Torah talks about inuyim. So what are the 5 inuyim?
Achilat and shtia would be one.
Very good.
The second would be, I'm not going to get them in the right order. Oh, actually, no, I can just read right here. Never mind.
An open book test.
Yes, exactly. And so bathing would be another. I guess the other would be anointing. Is that?
Yeah.
And the other would be putting on sandals. I mean, I guess we understand it to be leather sandals.
Okay. Yeah, we haven't discussed that yet, but it ultimately we will. And
what is euphemistically referred to as marital relations.
okay. Very good. Well, actually, what's euphemistically referred to as youth, which is marital relations, which is a euphemism for intercourse. It's a euphemism on a euphemism. So
except marital relations is not so much a euphemism so much as a Victorian term, because it assumes that, of course, that would only happen between man and wife.
Right? Because if marital relations isn't a euphemism, then it could just mean that 2 that are men are related, by marriage. Or maybe means they sit down to have breakfast together. It's a euphemism. That's a definition of euphemism. It's telling me something without telling you explicitly. Anyway. Okay. Hamelech tzarich sheyitra'eh na'eh. So the king. So why is it that the king? It says, will wash. The king is going to wash his face. So why does? No, let's understand the way these are phrased. It doesn't say Hamelch v'Akala mutrim berechitza, or it doesn't say Hamelch v'Sherachzu shehim pturim, right? It doesn't say that. It says Yirchitzu, they will wash their faces, respectively. So Hamelch tzarich sheyitra'eh na'eh. A king has to look nice. Because there's a pasuk in Yeshayahu, it says that a king in his beauty, your eyes will see. Right? There's this idea that yofi being associated with the king. There's certain there's halachot regarding a king, and one of them is that he has to maintain his appearance. Unlike, let's say, Sofri. Some of us are not very careful. No, but like the king had to also, he had to get his haircut every day, and he had to, he always had to be presentable. So even on Yom Kippur, when he would otherwise be forbidden from washing, on Yom Kippur he has to wash. Same thing with the kala. The kala tzrichad noi kedei l'chababala al ba'ala. A kala has to have beauty in order to make her beloved to her husband. B'chol shloshim yom kruya kala. She's called a kala for the first 30 days. In other words, from the time she's married, she's considered a kala for at least this purpose, that she washes on Yom Kippur, right? V'chaya yoledet, the woman who's given birth, tin ol, right? So she's going to put on the sandal, b'nei hatzina, because of the cold. And there was an understanding that a woman, after she gave birth, was particularly susceptible to cold, and so for her it was particular danger if she didn't wear shoes. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. And so now the Bartanura says akul hu kai. It refers to all of them. In other words, the question, does it refer just to the chaya, or does it refer to the nav and the kala? So the Bartanura says akul hu kai refers to all of them. Amelech v'kala v'chaya refers to the king, to the bride, and to the woman who gave birth. V'halacha k'Rebbi Eliezer. And in fact, we hold halacha to be like Rebbe Eliezer. Okay. Bartanura on the next Mishnah. Halchel k'kotevet hagasa. Bartanura says k'kotevet tmara gasa, the fat date. V'hi pachot mikabetza. It's less than the size of an egg. Even though all rim of eating we measure according to the size of an olive, that's because those are things about which the Torah describes the act of eating. It actually uses the term achila. Here, what the Torah says is this soul not afflict itself on Yom Kippur will be chayav. In other words, here the rule of thumb, the basic shiur that I'm concerned about, is not what I consider to be a minimum amount that a person would call. What I'm concerned about is how much does one have to eat before they will not feel afflicted, right? You have to afflict yourself on Yom Kippur. One has to feel afflicted on Yom Kippur. So if you eat enough to no longer feel afflicted, then you've eaten too much. So the K'nei Midah, right? The rule of measure that we're going to use isn't the minimum amount of what I consider to be eating. It's that I have to eat enough that I'm going to feel not afflicted. So this is what the Bartanura says, Gemiri, so it was learned, in other words, it was the tradition that came down to the Chachamim, that less than the size of this fat date, a person's mind would not be at ease. In other words, if you were hungry and you ate less than the size of a fat date, that would not be enough to assuage your hunger. That would not be enough to put your mind at ease. And you will still be afflicted. You'll still feel afflicted. So the shiur eating on Yom Kippur is not the same as the shiur of eating that you might have to do, let's say, when you eat. Where else do we have to eat in the Torah?
matzah on Pesach.
You have to on Pesach, right? Or you have to eat Korban Pesach. Nowadays, we don't have Korban Pesach, but those are two things that the Torah says you have to. So when it says that you have to eat the Korban Pesach, or you have to eat matzah, so then we have to know, what do I consider to be eating? So the Chachamim learn that to be considered eating for the purposes of fulfilling those mitzvot, you have to eat a kazayit. So kazayit, as we know, right, an olive worth is going to be much smaller than the size of a fat date. So on Pesach, it's enough to eat a kazayit, but on Yom Kippur, if you only eat a kazayit, that's not considered to be achilah l'inyan Yom Kippur. Now, so the question is, okay, so what if I eat less than that on Yom Kippur? Mihu, Bartanur brings, nonetheless, kaimalan the chatzi shiur asur min Torah. Nonetheless, we learn that less than a shiur is forbidden from the Torah. The term here is chatzi shiur. So chatzi, we usually translate it to mean half. But chatzi just means, it more literally means something that was split off, right? The chatzot something, it means to hide something. So a chatzi shiur is anything less than a shiur. Anything less than a shiur, asur, here he says it's asur min haTorah. The Torah still forbids you to eat even less than a shiur on Yom Kippur. Ela she'en chayavin karet v'lo lokin ela al kashir. But nonetheless, you're not, if you do eat less than a shiur, even if you did it b'mezid, you're not chayav karet, and you would be given malkut if you ate it purposely with with warning from two witnesses and witnesses witnessing you. So this question of chatzi shiur asur min Torah or asur min d'Rabbanan is the subject of the first sugya in the Gemara. It's a machloket between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan holds that eating less than a shiur on Yom Kippur is an isur d'oraita, and Reish Lakish holds it's an isur, but it's only an isur d'oraita. So we hold halacha to be like Rabbi Yochanan, that even a shiur is isur d'oraita, and that's why the Bartanur brings him here. We'll go into that a little bit more when we come back to some of the sugyot in the Gemara. All right, and so if somebody drinks melo lugmav, and so here he defines melo lugmav, kol she'ilu yisalkenu letzad echad, yeh oto habolet v'nireh. Right, if you all of the liquid that if you push it, if you draw it off to one side, that side would sticking out noticeably. Nikra melo lugmav. That's called melo lugmav. Shiur zeh ba'adam beino hu pachot mi revi'it. This amount in an average man, an average person, is less than a revi'it. So, of course, we haven't mentioned a revi'it, but a revi'it is also considered to be the minimum sheer drinking in the Torah for other purposes. And so here, in contrast to the Kekotevet is more than a kazayit. It's more than one would normally have to eat to be considered eating. But when it comes to drinking, then actually melo lugmav is less than that. It's what one would normally have to drink to be drinking. and we'll go a little more into these shiurim when we come back. Okay, yes.
Are you allowed to eat less than a shiur, or are you not allowed to eat less than a shiur?
So he says you're not allowed to do that.
But if you are not allowed, there's no, the shiur doesn't make any sense. Why do you need the shiur?
Because if you what? So anybody else? What's the purpose of this shiur?
So the shiur determines whether you're chayav or not.
Right. In other words, it'll determine if you're liable to some kind of punishment. So if you eat less, you don't get a punishment. In other words, Beit Din is not going to give you a punishment. And whether or not the Kadosh Baruch Hu gives you a punishment, we don't know. But if he does, it won't be karet. But that's that difference. The difference is for the purposes of punishment. Now we'll learn that ultimately there will be other differences as well, because in cases where in certain cases when people may be advised to eat on Yom Kippur, then halacha is going to tell them that they should eat less than a shiur, and thus not go into an isur of that involves a chiyuv punishment. But we're not going to get into that.
And if you eat less than a shiur, and then again eat less than a shiur, is that okay?
So here, this is something that we didn't get into yet, but it's going to be pertinent to Mishnah Gimel. Well, actually already pertinent. So I'm glad that you brought it up. I was thinking when we were doing the earlier night that maybe we should mention it, but here it says, so if you eat and drink, so then there's a question. So what if I take a sip at 10 o'clock in the morning, another sip at 11 o'clock in the morning, another sip, and I sip all day, so that by the end of the day I've drunk mulo lugmal. Or I take a little bite. Let's say I have these fat dates in front of me, and I just take little nibbles on them. That you have to eat, like matzah, right? Like so.
Shame you disappeared for
okay.
For 2 minutes, 1 minute, I don't know.
Okay.
For a shiur of time.
Once in a while, this little thing pops up and it says my internet connection is unstable. And I usually try to pay attention. Whenever it pops up, I try to stop talking until it goes away. And I realize now that I skipped over it. So there's an idea that when you eat, let's take a very simple example. When you eat on a regular day, and then you want to bench, in order for you to have an obligation to say a bracha after you ate, you have to fulfill essentially these two criteria. You have to have eaten something, and you have to have eaten a shiur of that something within a certain period of time. And the period of time is called kedei achilas. It's the time it takes to eat a pras of bread, which is a certain shiur. So we'll go into that, but it's an important point. It's an important point because, for example, in the example that I was alluding to, let's say somebody is told that they should eat. Let's say a doctor tells them that they should eat on Yom Kippur. So then we have to determine if as you know, some people just have to eat normally, and that's on doctor's orders. and they have to, and if the doctor says you have to, that's it. And we'll learn about that later on in this parak. But there are also some people that might be borderline, that like the doctor will say to them, you can't go for such and such amount of time without fluid, without drinking, let's say. So then we might say to them, ask the doctor, so if I drink less than a shiur, let's say every 10 minutes, is that okay? Like, so within an hour, I'll drink this amount of, and then the doctor says, okay, so then yes. So then we'll say to that patient or that person, it's better for you to eat less than a shiur at 8 than to eat the shiur, drink the shiur in that small time. So we will get into all these issues. By the way, this issue of shiurim is only pertinent on Yom Kippur. It's not an issue on Tisha B'Av, but we didn't learn Hilchot Tisha B'Av. But it's a chumrah because it's Diorata, then we're much more careful. If you have to break your fast on Tisha B'Av, then it's different. If you break your fast, then if you need to for medical reasons, then you break your fast. You don't have to do it with shiurim. All right, so let's just finish off this last Bartanura. Right, so if you ate and drank in one unconscious state, you only have one chatat, and the Bartanura says, because we learn out drinking from one pasuk. It's of one name. In other words, it's the same category, meaning it's this category in terms of the isur. I learned that out from two different verses. So it's two categories. Things that you're not allowed to do on Yom Kippur. And so their korbanot are also divided. Their punishments are divided. So this is where we're going to finish for today. Next week, I'm traveling, so I won't be able to give shiur. The following couple of weeks, I'll be in the States, but God willing, I should be able to give shiur. But the next time we meet, we'll do Mishnah Daled Hey Vav. I'm not sure if we'll get all the way to the end of the chapter. We'll try to do another 3 or 4 Mishnayot, and then hopefully within the next 2 shiurim, we'll have gone through the first reading of the Mishnayot, and we'll go back and we'll concentrate on particular issues with the Gemara and with Halacha. So that for now. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good night. Nesiya tova.
Toda. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Nesiya tova. Bye-bye.
Nesiya tova.
Toda. Bye-bye.
Regards the Golden Medina.